Volume 2, here we go. I'm not going to show you the whole process because it's going to be very similar to the previous one. What I'll show you though is that you see there's a split here on the end paper, but it's still joined here, and I'm going to split the book down here, keeping the end paper joined to the paste down, and then just make good there. It'll make for a neater job. Lots and lots of pages hanging out, corners quite badly bumped, ragged at the spine ends. It's going to be a very similar job, so I'm just going to get on with it, and I'll edit this massively. These are pale yellow end papers and you can't replace them, so I'm using the original material and preserving it. First of all, I used a little bit of PVA down the spine just to secure it, and then having folded out all the tiny little fragments of paper, use some archival tape. Once the text block is ready, I can reinsert it and you won't even be able to see how the mend was done. There we are, Nicholas Nickleby, Volume 2, done in 1 hour and 40 minutes. So that's how long it's taken me to do this one. I'm speeding up as I'm getting more and more used to this type of mend. Okay, so 1 hour and 40 minutes for that one, just over 2 hours for Volume 1. The second part of the set, Volumes 3 and 4 of the Illustrated Library Edition, restored.
The next day.
I've got here Martin Chuzzlewit in 2 volumes. These are volumes 5 and 6 of the Illustrated Library Edition. So this is the next job I'm tackling. When I unpacked the box of books and showed you a few volumes, these happened to be the first ones that I took out, and actually they're the best preserved, so I was a bit fooled into thinking they were in quite good condition. These are the best, and I've just cleaned the heads. You can see they're nice and clean now, and I'm going to start work on them. And as there's not a great deal to do, I'll almost do this in real time and tell you a bit about the novel as we're going through. So I've just got to tidy up the splits to the end papers. Got to re-glue a few sections that are loose. You can see there are sections hanging out, but actually the spine mull is intact, so I don't have to reback the book, I don't have to take it to pieces, and there are just a few small repairs. There's a nick to the top of the spine there which I'll be working on, and that's one volume, and the second volume is actually even better. There's very little to do to the second volume, so it'll just be tidying these up. Okay, let's have a go. First thing is to find out where there are pages loose and repair them. Now, this wasn't issued in sequence of Dickens's published works. We started off with Pickwick, which is of course Dickens's greatest success. The next great comic novel was Nicholas Nickleby, and of course that's in 2 volumes, and then the publishers clearly wanted to issue another 2-volume novel, and they chose Martin Chuzzlewit. Now here's a question. This novel, this set of books, is actually better preserved than most of the others, and my experience of working with old Dickens books is that the less popular works tend to be better preserved, okay, because fewer people have thought over the course of the past 150-60 years, oh, I want to read that. And so this tells you probably that Martin Chuzzlewit wasn't everyone's favourite book, and that's an interesting thought in itself. So Was it or wasn't it one of Dickens's most popular works in his day? Well, actually, the answer is it wasn't. And so Dickens started writing Chuzzlewit, and sales rapidly dropped off. So he was a bit disappointed about this, as were his publishers, and Dickens had to do something about it to try and reverse the trend and to bring back his readers. So what did he do? Well, he decided in the course of writing the novel, and this was not part of his original intention, he decided that he would send his hero and Mark Tapley, his companion, off to America. And Dickens had visited the United States in 1842 on an extended visit, his first trip across the Atlantic, and he'd used his impressions of America to write American notes, but he hadn't incorporated any of his observations or any of his feelings about the United States into his fiction. And so he thought, all right, well, let's send Martin Chuzzlewit across the Atlantic and we can have a good laugh at the Americans, because this was a popular sport for the British to engage in, to make comments about their cousins across the big pond. And Dickens was quite critical in Martin Chuzzlewit of many aspects of American life. Now, this didn't go down well with Americans. They felt that Dickens was being unfair to them. They'd welcome him with open arms. He was given a sort of hero's welcome on his arrival in New York. He was well treated, and they felt that they were being poorly rewarded by being satirised in Martin Chuzzlewit. And Dickens's justification was, well, look, he's a social commentator. He's not there just to show the good side of everything. He's trying to show things as he sees it, and where he saw faults, he pointed them out. And, you know, this could be a learning experience. Well, the Americans didn't like this at all. Now, it's not that Dickens went with any ill intent towards the Americans. Far from it. Dickens was a great Americophile before he went. I would say even that he was a Republican. Dickens was no great fan of the monarchy. Really, no great fan at all. And so, I mean, he was well disposed towards the Americans. He thought they'd done a good job in getting rid of the British monarchy, British rule, writing a constitution, setting up a republic. These were all good things in Dickens's eyes. And he went to America almost believing that he was going to visit the promised land. And what do you know? The place that he sends Martin Chuzzlewit is called Eden. Ha 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 ha. But it's anything but the Garden of Eden. It's a backwater, it's a swamp. Martin gets very ill, almost dies, has to be nursed back to health, and the entire trip, which is meant to be starting a new life in the new world, is a failure. So the idea that you go across to America and strike it rich is kind of scotched as an idea that it ain't that simple, and it's not everything that it's cracked up to be. So Dickens was somewhat disillusioned from his trip to America. There were many things about it that he liked, and he is full of praise for some aspects of the American system and the American way of life, but he's not uncritical, let's say. He's certainly got views on many aspects of American life that he didn't quite get on with. And when he went back in the 1860s, people hadn't quite forgiven him. This is on his second trip to America. And he made a public declaration about how much he liked America and how he's always been a great friend of the Americans. And, you know, there was no malice in what he was doing. And he made this speech, which was reprinted in All the Year Round. And then he insisted that it was reproduced and included as a postscript in subsequent editions of Martin Chuzzlewit. So he felt the criticism that he received from the Americans, and because he valued their friendship and of course their readership, he wanted to make amends. The other thing that really rankled with him on his first trip to America was to do with copyright. So there was no international copyright agreement at that time, didn't come into force until the 1890s, and Dickens felt that even though he was popular in America, he wasn't actually making any profit out of it, because anybody could pirate his works and publish them without him receiving a penny. So he made numerous references to this while he was in America, and people felt, oh, this is unfair. Surely he's already a very rich man, which he wasn't at the time. And you know, the fact that we love him, isn't that enough? So they felt that he was rather mercenary in his attitude towards them. Now, as I said, he sent Martin Chuzzlewit to America because the novel wasn't as popular as it might have been, and sales were going down. So he sends him to the States, and guess what? The British public lapped it up. Oh yes, let's have a dig at our American cousins. So the British reading public enjoyed that, and sales picked up, but not to the extent that the publishers were entirely happy with the results. So the deal that Dickens had with Chapman and Hall was dependent to a degree on precise sales, and the publishers threatened to invoke a clause in the contract whereby they could pay him less because Martin Chuzzlewit wasn't as successful as previous works, or as successful as they anticipated. And Dickens was rather miffed by this. He was outraged, frankly, that here he was, their star author, the author that had made the name for the firm of Chapman and Hall, and they were threatening to reduce his payment because of a temporary blip in sales. And so he saw Martin Chuzzlewit through to the end of its print run, finally published in book form in 1844. But then he quit Chapman and Hall. So he stopped publishing with them, using the pretext that they were threatening to invoke this clause in his contract, and he became contracted to Bradbury and Evans, who were the printers for Chapman and Hall, right? So they were not very well known, or hardly known at all, as publishers. They just started printing Punch, okay, so the great weekly comic miscellany Punch. This was a major success in the 1840s, and Bradbury and Evans were responsible for that. And Dickens decided that he would chance his arm with Bradbury and Evans as the publisher of his fiction works in the future. And so Martin Chuzzlewit is the last book published by Chapman and Hall until Tale of Two Cities. So he returned to them for that historical novel in 1859. But between 1844 and 1859, effectively, Dickens was a Bradbury and Evans author. Okay, I'm going to stop now.
2 seconds later.
Now this is interesting. Okay, here's the title page, and you may be able to see that it's got both publishers still on it. It's got Chapman and Hall and Bradbury and Evans. So again, this is issued in 1861, and at the time when this was issued, the rights to Dickens's novels were still split between Chapman and Hall and Bradbury and Evans, and both publishers' names appeared on the title page. The interesting thing here is that, look, the title page is still attached to, actually it's the dedication page, and very interesting, the dedication to Martin Chuzzlewit is to Miss Burdett Coutts. This tale is dedicated with the true and earnest regard of the author. Aha! Well, the interesting thing here is that these two leaves are what we call conjugate. They're joined together. It's not like there was only the title page on its own and that was inserted. What the printers did, and this is printed by Bradbury and Evans, is they printed extra prelims. Prelims being the material before the text proper. So that's the title page, the dedication page, and the preface, and inserted a new set of prelims into the text, which is taken from the library edition, not the illustrated library edition of 1858-59. So the rest of this book was printed in 1858, but the prelims, which are newly inserted, are from 1861. There you are. And it's got both publishers' names and the date of 1861 on the title page. Right, the other work I have to do, I've got to make a piece to fit in here at the bottom of the spine. There's a split here, and I'm going to have to make good that. Those are the two jobs I've got to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare those pieces, and then I'll just show you how I insert them. Right, I've opened up the split on the spine, removed the loose backing paper, and I've made this neat little piece of cloth. You can see I've rounded off the corners. I do this so that you don't get any hard edges. And sometimes when you're trying to insert a little piece like this, if there are sharp corners, they tend to curl over. So rather than allow that to happen, just round the corners off. So I've already checked that it fits. I'm inserting it. Goes in a treat. The question is now how to get the glue in there. And I'm not going to use a brush. I'm going to use my blunt craft knife. The trick here is to make sure you get glue in each of the crevices where it needs to go. That's the reason why I use a bladed instrument rather than, let's say, a brush or a bone folder. It's very fine, and I don't need to get down very deep into the mend because it's only a few centimeters. And then with a cloth, I'm just wiping off any excess glue, making sure that everything's exactly in place and the job's done. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is quite a neat repair. Volume 2 of Chuzzlewit done. Martin Chuzzlewit, 2 volumes, volumes 5 and 6 of the Illustrated Library Edition, restored.